What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Buy Sell Talk. We're at episode 15 today. And today I'm with the one and only Mr. Ari Forman.
See, he started out wrong.
All right, how do I do it?
Ari.
Ari Forman.
I answered anything. In my hood, they would call me Corey, Ori, anything that sounded like a vowel sound that was, and I would answer to it. Frequently, White Boy was my other name. And I'll answer to any of that. But no, Ari is
Ari?
Yeah, like Ariana Grande she calls herself Ari. Listen, I was the only Ari on earth until I was like,
until that happened.
I was like, no. So I was like about 18, 20. Then I realized there were a few more out there. Yeah. And then one day, all these children started showing up. I guess it got on a list of baby names.
Yeah, I think Entourage has something to do with that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. At some point, I don't know whether I was talking in a podcast, not a podcast, some kind of interview or something. And this dude introduced me or said that I was Ari Gold. And I didn't even know who the character was. And I was like, I think you're lumping me into the wrong crowd.
Wait, so you let that slide, or like?
I mean, I kind of get it. Nobody ever heard Ari until that, probably.
Yeah,
right.
So
like, and so there was no
what's
context.
His last name?
And now Ari has become like a stripper name.
Yeah.
And so like Raven, Ari, Crystal, or whatever, And I'm getting tagged on Instagram.
Yeah, and it has nothing to do with
strippers in Atlanta. Atlanta crazy. Like hosted by Ari. And it's a picture of this woman with, all kind of work in the backyard. And she's just huge. Sheesh. And my name's and people are tagging me, and dudes are like sliding into my DMs and stuff. I'm like, oh, come on, guy.
No,
don't ever get an easy Instagram name. Listen, you'd think that it's a benefit, it's the gift, but it's the curse, and I staunchly defend it, owning it. But at this point, you're better off having those those crazy meme accounts that are just wacky numbers and letters. Then people are coming there for you.
Exactly.
They come to me because their dog's named Ari, their horse is named Ari, their stripper's named Ari. Every one of their cousins in India and Pakistan are named Ari.
Wait, so have people approached you for your Instagram handle?
They still do.
Jeez. Yeah. I know you have like a whole disclaimer in your bio, so
you have to, because it's not as bad as it was. Like early in the Ariana Grande stage.
Oh, yeah.
Because she didn't exist when I had it. Well, she existed.
Yeah.
But she didn't have
she wasn't
fame
out there.
The same way.
Exactly.
And she never wanted it or anything. There was never anybody from her camp that asked for it. She didn't need to.
Yeah.
But
like her fan
all
base,
her fans felt that since she was called Ari, that if they had that handle, that they'd be the number one fan.
Yeah.
And we're talking about a global phenomenon with her. She's like Beyonce, Mariah Carey level.
Yeah.
And so there was a couple of years. I mean, I would get 14-year-olds threatening me.
Jesus.
So, like heavily threatening me. Girls sending dudes from their high school into my DMs like, don't make us come and get you. I'm like, oh, okay.
All right. Good luck.
If you can come to me and get me, then you deserve this username. I'm not a tough guy, but I got some tough guys around.
Yeah.
So, but it's just it's just people. And every once in a while, like I would entertain it and go back and forth with them, and they'd be like, you got no chance, man. It's not monetary. It's principle. And then they're like, oh, I had to shoot my shot. And they get all, then next thing you know, you're friendly with the guy after he's been threatening you for 2-3 days or something.
Yeah, it all comes full circle sometimes.
Yeah, it's,
That was actually going to be my joke. This is Ari, not Ari Gold. LOL.
Oof, please.
And then, I was going to hit myself with this guy.
Do I look like a Jewish lawyer?
And I'm Leo.
Hi, Leo.
And what is everybody wearing on feet today?
Oh.
You want to start?
Sure. Look, these beat old things, intentionally so. I wore these intentionally here. People know me. They see that I wear Vandals a lot. These are Vandals.
Mm-hmm.
And I wear them up because they're kind of worthless.
Yeah.
And they're sort of that weird, awkward cousin between other things of that era in the 80s.
Yeah.
Right.
And these are samples. These are 2004 samples. It says sample in the tag.
Mm-hmm.
And I was buying a lot of samples back then from salesmen, back when they physically going around. And so I had a lot of Vandals because no one else really wanted them. And they were playful with them colorway wise. And I really liked the old Air Force Ones that were canvas. There were like lows. There's some highs maybe. I forget now.
Yeah, but the inner panel was canvas on the highs.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the lows was like a full deal.
Yeah.
Right.
And there was something really special about the design of it, and this sort of piping, this edging that they have. And so I really kind of fell in love with them. And so I had a lot of them in storage, and then I just wasn't wearing anything for a long time. And then a few years ago, I started breaking them all out. And I thought, you know what? What's sort of my signature from then and now?
Yeah.
And literally a shoe that was made, the manufacturing date in here is when I started the process of making the Menthol 10s case study.
Gotcha.
So it's a little bit of symbolism. I tend to do that with everything that I do. And I thought about it today, and I said, you know what? This is the 20th anniversary we're coming up on. It's the 18th anniversary of the release, 2006.
Right.
But the process back then wasn't like hitting up Alibaba.
Yeah.
So there's a bit more of a process to it. So if it takes Nike a year of planning and stuff, and not to say they can't manufacture overnight, but there is a process. And for me, it was a real process with my friend James Ling, who really helped me out. And I don't get to talk about him much, but he was my connection. He was a friend of mine who's grew up in the Cantonese kitchens in Jersey.
Oh, nice.
And he had to connect. He was working with he was working with Echo Unlimited, but he had worked for years with South Pole, which has a strong. They're based in Jersey, and then their brother of the guy who owned South Pole was owned Against All Odds.
Okay.
Which was that chain here in Jersey as well.
Yeah.
North to south, I think. Might have crossed over a couple of rivers. I don't know. And he had a connection to Korean cats who were manufacturing all sorts of outerwear and footwear and jackets and whatnot. And so without him, I couldn't have done it. And that process really started in 2004. So these shoes that was a long way to get to a very simple, these are from 2004. But that's the significance and why I wore them. I'm not necessarily a Knicks or Mets fan.
Yeah.
But these are the reason that the Mets and the Knicks have those colors is it's the New York flag.
Yeah.
Those are the colors of the New York flag. The white, the black, the blue, and the orange.
Yeah.
So it's an important shoe to me in many ways.
Word.
So let's talk about your footwear, gents.
So I'm wearing the pine green off-white Dunk Lows leather. So this was the inspiration for the 50 pack that released not too long ago. The 1 out of 50. So this was like the first iteration of it. It was this, a UNLV color, and then the Michigan color.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And then after this, he went on to do the 50 pack.
It's very much a Newport ad.
Yeah.
So I imagine that was strategic on your part.
Yeah,
Okay. We're all thinking here.
I didn't know the actual like time frame of like I knew when it released, but I was like, there's no way that it released and made the same year. So let me just go like super like tonal with the colors.
They're gorgeous. I really admired and really appreciate Virgil's ability to have so much power.
Yeah.
So much clout to go in there and make Nike bend. And I understand. We can get into that later or something. I don't know. But
Right.
I understand how difficult it is to get in there and
100%.
make them be flexible. Espo really did that in a way that I think that influenced Virgil in the way that probably the Menthols in some way did. He's spoken about it. But, it was hard to. And it's very hard to get them to do anything, and that's sort of why.
Yeah,
we're here.
No, for sure. Like between that or like even Jordan, like nowadays they're they're flexible on like rebranding the Jordan brand. For J Balvin, more recently for the Dornbecker, they redid the entire heel tab for Hugo.
Yeah.
Stuff like that is unheard of. Obviously, like Travis Scott has the reverse check, but Dennis Rodman actually put that on first. You know what I mean? But for the most part, like I feel like, these bigger brands are like now in tune and see like, hey, like maybe we shouldn't, just be so gatekeepy to the point where it's like, let's just let them create.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What's the point of collaboration if you're bringing on a creator and you're forcing them through strict rules and here are your 7 colorways to choose from? Like, here's your, your 7 silhouettes, have at it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I'm privy to, as you guys are, a lot of sneaker conversation, and it's the term armchair analyst.
Yeah.
The people that never played football but have all kinds of opinions about it. And it's not to belittle anybody that has an opinion. I mean, opinions move mountains in some ways. But people don't really understand. Like I'm traditionally trained in graphic design, and there's a term that's called logo mutilation, and it up until really recently, and I think social media, internet has all sort of sped that along, is that you don't change a logo. You don't put it. You have a style guide that comes with every logo, and I was dealing with one today actually with a client. And in there is all the brand identity, how it's used, the colors, the PMS, how you use it, how you don't use it, especially how you don't use it, what you don't put it into. And Nike really, is a very uptight company, to be quite honest. It doesn't seem like it, but they really are. It's to a degree, you have to be at that level. But mutilating the logo, turning it up, is a problem.
Yeah.
From a traditional standpoint, but we're in a modern era, and people can recognize your logo no matter what you do with it, because everything is so over branded. These guys have done such a good job that they're shooting themselves in the foot by not allowing people to be creative. If you can identify that logo, whether it's chopped in half, put upside down, set on fire, wavy, twisted, you've done your job. You've done your job good, and you should prove it. You should get people used to seeing your logo everywhere else. Because
essentially like what it was is like, like once you get, at its essence, it's like, hey, we want to become a household brand. And once you become a household brand, you don't want to dilute from that, because then like what's the point of?
It's brand recognition. There's another term that when you're at the level of like Coca-Cola, and Nike is huge. It might be up there, but Coca-Cola is number one in the world. There's just nothing more recognizable. And Coca-Cola can't really get any more market share. They got to wait for people to be born. They're only growing as population growth happens. Basically, they can lose some traction here and there. A little soda becomes popular, energy drinks, other categories steal market share, but they're growing anyways. They may have had 90% of a market share and they go down to 80%, but they're still making more money and have more going on. So there's this point at which the term comes up, and it's just brand maintenance, they call it. And you're not adding on. You're not making more money. You're just maintaining that you don't lose an audience.
Right.
And that's sort of that same mentality, which is, keep it simple, stupid, and just have the logo repeated. But like anything, people get tired of a logo. And it plays out. And so if you can keep it energized, if you can look down the road and look past your consumer, look past the trend, and look past the influencers, you can easily predict what needs to come. And, your company like Nike, you can fail upwards. And that term, it really is exactly what it sounds like, where you can do so much wrong, but you get a couple things right, and you get it right really well. It makes up for it. It's Hollywood's the same way. You got 2 blockbuster movies, all the flops don't matter that year. They all pay for everything, plus everybody's salary, plus shareholders take. Everybody wins. But it's still failing upwards, right? There's still a lot of fails in there.
On this side of the house.
We look at it as, cultural, people who love the culture of Nike. And, we get in and we nerd out on it. But, it's easy to sort of just forget that, like, you love your parents, but they do a lot of fucked up shit. You don't like everything they do. And you got some cousins that you love, you don't like them. And there's a lot,
That's probably the best way to put it,
You can love somebody and not like them. And you can like them and not love them. And family is, we're born with them. So I love all my family. But there's a couple in there, man, I don't like them motherfuckers. and it's fine. And it's that sort of, again, be redundant, that's sort of the approach of why we're having this conversation, is that, I looked at them as sort of like a parent in some ways, like a hero. But then you realize, like, oh, that guy saves lives, but he also smoked crack. Fuck.
Not to segue off of crack, but Brian, what are you wearing?
That's a perfect segue in the trap house here.
Well, I love my Air Maxes, and I had to go with the Casina Air Max 1. I really love the materials, what they did. I love the wooden dubre. I love what it means for Korean culture.
Right.
Actually looked up that it's modeled after the ducks that groomsmen give to the
Like
family.
a mallard?
Yeah.
A mallard duck.
No, like porcelain ducks.
Oh,
so they
porcelain
gift
ducks.
they gift a pair of porcelain ducks
Really?
to the family of the bride to be,
Uh-huh.
and essentially that's how they ask for marriage.
Oh, incredible.
Yeah.
Nice.
I've been around a long time. That's something I never heard, and that's beautiful. I mean, the colors are gorgeous.
No, yeah.
It's gorgeous. If you're an Air Max fan or just any kind of running shoe fan, there's not many versions of an Air Max in terms of colorways that really have that maturity.
No, yeah.
And are still playful.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
It looks like it could come through Eddie Bauer or Orvis in one of their more playful iterations. ACG.
Yeah.
You know, it's earth tones and
no.
You're winning with that.
Oh,
I just might have to get those based on that purpose. You know me, I'm purpose driven. Like,
of course.
Things have to have meaning. And
there's another colorway of this that's more neutral toned. So that might fare you better, to be honest. If you really are for it.
Those are the ones. Those are the ones.
You sold me on Dubre. You know, there's I
no,
argue with people all the time. They're like, "No, man, it's a lace lock." They're not Jordan 5s. They don't lock anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what that happens. Now that I'm looking at them, they do remind me of my favorite Air Max of recent, Air Max 1, which is the Pata, the brown ones. Look like a men's shoe.
Yeah.
With the way that they sort of gave that aged look to the leather.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about the waves, right?
Yeah, with the waves.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just a beautiful, simple twist on the concept, right? And some freedom that Nike gave them, just beautiful. And Pata is, just a class act. Everything about them. And those guys have always been really friendly and treated me well. Good gentlemen. And to see them have that win, I mean, that win, this is decades. These guys have been around.
Yeah.
And to have such a beautiful shoe, so impactful, and to do so many different colorways.
Mm-hmm.
And then that sort of crown jewel for me, which was the one that's probably the least sought after, that brown one. But it's just gorgeous.
Oh, no, yeah.
It's a gorgeous thing. I almost wore it. I almost wore them. So, G and Edson, I almost wore them, but I had to take this purposeful mission here.
No word.
Is that a good enough plug for you guys? They didn't pay me, but they do look out. They're really good people over there. If you have a chance to get to Amsterdam, you got to check them out and say hi to them.
Word.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's cool that Nike is very inclusive of, other parts of the world when it comes to collaborations.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I feel like that's really what, we really need sometimes.
Yeah, Nike, I mean, my God, could you get any bigger? They're global, whether they want to be or not, right?
Yeah.
They've worked hard to be, but they have partnerships, and some of those partnerships look really good. I think it would be nice if they had better partnerships with their retail partners, especially the mom and pops. And I think Pata is a good example of when it goes right and really looks good. And I don't think Pata needs Nike the way some collaborations do, the way some partners do without that Nike account.
Kind of
like Supreme doesn't need Nike, right?
Yeah.
No.
It doesn't hinge on. It helps a little bit, but not really.
No.
They're a brand unto themselves. But some people, and we've seen in the past, some brands are just hooked into that. And when Nike does the rug pull on them? They go
dissipate.
They're gone, and that's
true.
It's really quite sad. You would think that the people who champion your culture would be treated bad, even if they don't know how to act sometimes, even if they break the rules. They're backdooring.
Yeah.
Really? Really?
Oh no.
At this point, really, like, I'm sure Foot Locker is still a top retailer for them.
Yeah.
And Foot Locker bought who? Goat or?
Yeah, they bought into Goat.
So they bought into a reseller.
Mm-hmm.
That's reselling and backdooring.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a company that's basically thriving off of backdooring.
Yeah. They literally that partnership was like, when Flight Club was buying, or when Goat was buying Flight Club, they brought along Foot Locker with them, and then they created that new app, which is Alias, which is just strictly a selling app.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But two different apps.
A little bit of a conflict of interest there, Nike. No?
Yeah.
I don't know.
God forbid.
See, this is a perfect example where you can love your parents, but you don't got to like them.
Oh, no, yeah. As a former Foot Locker employee, I just thought it was hilarious where it's like, hey, like, I was in the time frame where they started to decrease availability. So like every year they do like a give back to the employees, and they do a 50% off, or I think it's every quarterly, like back to school, Christmas time frame, and like around Easter.
So they still make 10% on you or 20%.
Yeah.
The problem is that it got to the point where everything is excluded but what they want you to buy.
Oh, so the GR stuff they can't move.
Yeah. So it got to the point where like I still have, you know, like some ties or whatever, and people that are there, and like the stupidest stuff is like a scooter, like Nike socks, or like freaking Nike
like a
Tech
10-pack of sweat socks,
like Nike Tech, or like, you know, like this specific Air Force, or like
the Monarch.
Yeah, like to this day, like no one can get a discount on like the holiday Jordan 11, because that's the prestigious release of the year.
That's like the unbroken rule that they
so it's like
stick to.
They've like made it so much smaller and minute as to like why you should work there as a teenager anyway. Like, you know, you go into Foot Locker and it's like, hey, like I have accessibility and I have a discount, you know. Of course I got a paycheck, but that's all I wanted.
What's the other incentive you
know what I mean? Now it's like, oh, I have accessibility, but I don't get a discount anymore, because out of, let's just call it 24 releases in a year, you know, 18 of them are forbidden to be discounted. So I have to buy them at actual price. It's like at that point, I'm just a customer.
Yeah, it's not really a perk.
What am I really doing here anymore? You know?
I have an interesting kind of funny Foot Locker story. I used to have an office for my marketing company on 37th and Broadway. And right there is the big 34th Street. Now I think it's like upstairs or something, but it was like street level, really big. I mean, it's one of the biggest I'd ever seen, especially then. Yeah. And I would go in there and I was checking. This is early in the game. And so I would go in there and say, what's coming up? You know, what do you guys got going on? I'm not a sports dude. I like sports. I understand all the games because I'm a guy and I've been around enough men to have to understand, but I never played any sports. You know, I was a skater, dancer, that kind of thing. So I just like, as a designer and as just someone who's creative, I like to look at the shoes. So I didn't really care if it was what sport it was associated to, but Jordan had more momentum and sort of more leeway. It was sort of like the Air Max program, and then there was like the Jordan program, right? But the 17s were coming. And the 17s were, I'm sure that it's a love-hate of people who probably love or hate them. To me, it was weird. You know, it's a square toe. It's like a shoe. It came in a suitcase. Yeah. And it was really kind of forward and innovative. And I was like, you know, I really like these. And I don't know what they're going to do, but I'm in. And at the time, I was talking to somebody that worked there, and I won't say who and how level, but they were like, I was like, hey, you guys going to be selling these any kind of which way, maybe? Yeah. And they were like, yeah, we're going to sell them. That day those things went on sale. If you don't know the Foot Locker there, 34th Street is like, if you don't know New York, it's Macy's. You know, everybody knows the Macy's Day Parade. Yeah. It's a full block of Macy's with like 7, 8, 9 floors, multiple buildings that were merged together. And the Foot Locker is right across the street. It's a thoroughfare of shopping. It's probably second to Times Square. And probably there's more sales that probably go on there than Times Square, I bet. So this Foot Locker is huge. So it goes all the way through from 34th Street to 33rd Street. 33rd Street is where the loading and the back doors are. Yeah. They were like, show up at this time and have cash.
Knock twice.
Let me tell you, man, it was like looting. Yeah. The back doors opened up and it was 17s, just stacks and stacks. And it was like crackheads coming from everywhere for the shoes. And I had, you know, the cash I had, and I bought a stack of 17s that was like in the red box, the black box, the blue box, which was the colors that kind of went with it. Yeah. I still have a box or two somewhere. Yeah. And I was like, this is fucking insane. Is this where sneaker culture is going? I was like, I'm in, cool. Yeah. But this is crazy. And then I knew that was sort of like when I knew, we didn't know that there'd be platforms for it, but I knew that this was a drug flip. Yeah. It was different. It wasn't like me buying these samples and selling them to like celebs and people I knew, and I would sell them at Union, you know, over there with Marianne Fusco and James Jebbia, and I would just put things in the case there, one of one. Yeah, these dudes were moving weight. This was bricks.
Yeah, to fiends.
And these dudes that worked at Foot Locker, I think they sat there with the abacus, you know, with their calculator, and said, I'm going to lose my job over this in the best way. I'm going to buy a house off of losing my job today. I mean, it was kamikaze pilot. They were out.
Yeah.
They were just like, if we sell all these out the back, they're obviously going to show up, and nobody's coming back to work 2 weeks from then.
Yeah,
that's true.
I think
brilliant hustle.
The biggest irony of that is like stuff like that, and then like the mass chaos that happened in the front is what caused like in-store raffles. And
of course,
the irony of in-store raffles is that it actually set control to the stock or the inventory. So now, you know what I mean, you're in the front, you're handing out like tickets or whatever. So it's like, oh shit, like, you know, like, hey, anyone could win. I'm not going to tell you how many I have, but now I could just sell 95 of them and just raffle off 5. As long as 5 people win and they repost it, they're like,
I won.
I won at Foot Locker. And they're like, word.
Every one of my cousins in the Heights just won.
Yeah. And you know what I mean? It's like it pretty much like, I would say, you know, for lack of better terminology, it solidified like the backdooring.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it wasn't no longer like, you know, you go into a store and it's like, you know, on a release day, it's just on the wall.
Yeah.
Now it's like, hey, like we're going to have an organized line up front. You know, there's going to be methods to it, yada, yada.
And you guys can all stab and kill each other all you want out front.
Exactly. But little do they know that, you know, 50% of this inventory is already gone. No one's asking because now it's, oh, I'm in a line, and it's just so orchestrated. Oh my God, thank you for allowing me to buy my pair. And sorry, guy behind me, you didn't get it, even though you were 6 in line.
It's the dark business of what is the Nike empire. Yeah. It's all sneakers. It's not fair to single them out, but you know, this is their industry.
Yeah, I think it's bound to happen too.
Yeah. I mean, you know, and it's not happening with cars. People aren't lining up out front.
That's true.
And you see, like, you know, I live a couple blocks from an Apple store, and I see the resellers, the Chinese resellers who buy it to send overseas and resell. And they line up and they have like ticket scalping, which I used to sleep out for stuttering for ticket scalpers. You know the Supreme store on Sunset, the new Supreme store. I used to sleep out at that Tower Records for $20 for scalpers. I was homeless back then. It was like when I was a kid. And me and my mom we'd sleep out there. Sometimes somebody else would join us or something. Yeah. I'd get $20 and go to the arcade. But it's very much like that, right? Where those industries, like people aren't, you know, killing each other in the Apple line. There's an occasional scuffle or argument. And it really showed, you know, the dark part of this, which is it appeals to the inner city, and it appeals to people who see this as a lifeline. It's either floss or pay your bills, and it's a lifeline. And there's a certain amount of, you know, like man up, get ready, you know, life or death. And there's a documentary that somebody released online. It's a documentary that Nike funded, and it never was released. And the word of mouth was, I heard back then, this was like 2002, 2003, was that they didn't release it because the NBA wanted so much money for Jordan footage. And it was sort of like a promotional piece in many ways. It was a sneaker documentary before there were any, but it was going to heavy up on Jordan, right? That brand was just cooking heavily. And so they claimed that it was just too much cost. But the more that, if you look at this, it's online somewhere, and there's a few different versions of it, because I kept seeing edits of it at some point, but I was never given an edit. And if you look at it, it's just no way to paint it good, because it shows the early lines of like Jordan people on lines in 2002, 3, on 34th Street on like Foot Action or one of those, and then it shows during the blackout A-Life being looted. And Tony Agabashio getting hit in the head or something. Like, it doesn't show him, but it shows him
like right after.
Yeah, and he's like tapping his head with a rag, showing the blood, and it shows this really crazy dark side. And I'm talking in there, whatever nonsense I'm talking with my crazy look and hair, and it's really, you see that it's like the more they get into the subculture, the darker it kind of got. And then if you go to people's houses, you know, like AM is in there or somebody like that, and you see collections that look like these shells. And that's kind of nerdy and fun and, you know, Trekky, you know, Star Trek type of a thing. But then there's the reality. And the reality has now come full-fledged forward of just like full-on fist fights and shootings and stabbings.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is the dark end of it. And this is, again, why we're having this conversation, why we're here, is that, it's an inconvenient truth, right?
Yeah.
No, yeah.
And people really don't, there's a dark side to everything. And there's some things that are very dark. There's a light side. I'm not saying positive,
Mm-hmm.
but there's beauty in death,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It's like an autopsy is a beautiful thing. It's a morbid thing, and I can't deal with, I'm blood squeamish and all that. I've seen enough of it in my life, but there's beauty in ugly, and there's ugly in beauty.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to peel, it's like an onion, you got to peel back the layers.
Yeah.
And when you get in there, you get far enough in and you really see how it looks like, and you see the truth, you want to go and do something very purposeful.
Speaking of like onions and peeling back, most of or some of our viewers may not know who you are to begin with. So why don't you give us a little couple layers back and tell us about, not necessarily like, birth, but like talk to me about like the first, step into this industry and like what you've done. I know one of your first things were like going into like making belts and stuff like that. So
yeah, belts was just I'm wearing.
You're wearing one of them, yeah?
They're one of the older ones. I don't know if you can get that on camera. You can take a B-reel later or something. Yeah, but before that, it's a magazine.
Yeah,
on the go, right?
With Espo.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know that story, Espo is the Clear Air Force 2, and that was really a turning point for Nike in many ways. Espo's had a lot of turning points in certain things that he doesn't really get credit for.
Yeah.
And he's a dear friend, and without his genius, I really wouldn't have sharpened. I showed up with a very rusty, blunt knife, and he helped me really sharpen that. And his influence, even I met him in '85, graffiti writing, and he'd gotten into like a magazine or a newspaper article or something. And so then you couldn't really tell who he was, and then you could, and we met, and we were just friends. And he was doing this newsletter, and it was a black and white Xerox. It wasn't even a zine. It was like a graffiti newsletter in Philly.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point he hit me up, and I was in school for design. I was just 89, and I'm learning computers. And I think in 90 he hit me up initially. I forget, it's all blurry, but he was like, I want to turn this into a magazine, and do you know what to do design wise? And I was one of only 2 people graduating in my class that had digital portfolios in that way, understood publishing, or I wouldn't say publishing, but some form of digital publishing, desktop publishing. And so that's really my introduction into how people sort of got to know me. They wouldn't have known me before that locally, but at that point. And then as the magazine grew, as we sort of, we never made any money. It was terrible. But creatively, we were completely free. And that sort of where we both sort of understood our creative natures, fine art and commercial art merging. And the magazine was an opportunity to sort of be creative in every way we wanted to be on our terms and get, a few ads to pay for it. And then we still had to work our jobs. So that is really what is, that's why this is called, that's why it says On the Go. It's On the Go magazine.
Yeah.
And it says 10 on the side, which is, 10 Class A years. The reason that these are called the Menthol 10s, and the reason that this case study exists is based on the magazine initially, and a concept that I had even before that in the 80s, noticing the swoosh and the Spinnaker logo. So my story is this story of coming from being born in Oakland, California. I really don't know much about Oakland, but it is my place of birth. And being raised in LA till age 12 and going through, those years of homelessness out there, my family being a 2-pack a day type of family, smoking, drinking, drugs, everything you could imagine. It was really crazy. Moving to Philly to get some stability because my father was there in '82, and then coming up in Philly and understanding a sort of other different cultural nuances and being influenced in an East Coast kind of way. Even from my family are all from Philly. So it was an East Coast Philly family, but we were on the West Coast, at least for me. My siblings were all born in Philly. And they were living, my mother was with my siblings in the projects when she met my father and saw him as a way out. And it worked for a little bit. And I ended up in Philly back with my father, and those things were heavy influenced. And that's where, on the West Coast, it was cool. With a K, a cigarette.
Yeah.
And Newport really was, at least from my perspective, was an East Coast brand at the time. And I was like, oh, here's this thing, Salem, and my grandfather was smoking like Benson and Hedges.
Yeah.
But all of those things, why I'm bringing all this up is that if you don't know me, you're getting to know me right now. And in brief, these are the things that created this pot. It was a gumbo, a stew of all these ingredients of even Oakland, that I don't have a lot of memory of my siblings taking on certain aspects of that. And then LA being very influential and being in the Chicano culture there, and I'm not from the Hollywood Hills, I'm from the Flatlands. I grew up skateboarding up and down Hollywood Boulevard in the 70s. And so it was a very different kind of thing, and a very different kind of, white flight had happened. And so the cities were all falling and imploding. And LA, Hollywood was no different. Hollywood, it was, all the areas around were Chicano gangs.
Yeah.
And so those things came with me to Philly, and Philly was a very different kind of an experience. The gang culture had died in Philly, but the territory still existed. And I moved into what was predominantly a black neighborhood, and those cultural things and hip hop suddenly fell into my lap. It went from, like rock and disco and funk and stuff out in California to falling directly into hip hop. And these things, were all being added into this pot, and me never really having a very stable life anywhere. I never had a neighborhood and an identity that was so clear.
Right.
My siblings having a different father, and Italian father, and me having a Russian father, and my mother being German Episcopalian, just many different things.
Yeah.
And what it does is, like, most people know exactly who they are. Even if they're not sure what their makeup is, before 23andMe, they know who they are. And with me, I was always adapting. I always had to become something different. And all of those things play in to my creative process, and they all play into how this identifies me for some people, and all the concepts that are in there. And then meeting Espo as another part of the journey, and starting the magazine and being able to express those different cultural things that he has, that I have, that Max Glazer and Kenny Mees and Jimmy Wentz, these are all people that worked on the magazine, partners in the magazine. And all of us expressing ourselves collectively because we had a commonality, and that's how they knew each other. But we all brought our own individual. We were from different neighborhoods and different sort of evolutions of that.
Yeah.
And graffiti sort of being a bind. And so all of these things, and what we accomplished there, and that we created a sort of cult-like following, that people who would write us from all over the world, and we distributed the magazine all over the world in color form. At its peak, it was like 100 pages or something. And it never made any money. It was a monetary disaster, but we did something significant. And a lot of people, it influenced a lot of people we were influenced by. And we hoped to make money, but what we did in there set the stage. And that brings us up to this, that when, at this point I had created a marketing company, and that was successful. And it was, it was setting the stage for me to now do something in an area like sneakers, where we had worked on the Espo Air Force 2, a very significant, very culturally significant change, whether you liked it or not. It was supposed to be preposterous. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, and it sold out before.
Before Pharrell and Halle.
Sold out.
For sure.
With all of us together, how Espo really had a brilliant idea, and he didn't know a lot about sneakers comparatively to me. And it really took a lot of work for him to push through with Nike to make that happen. And so I knew that people knew about that shoe, but they didn't know necessarily my involvement, because there was no social media then. There's just MySpace at that, not even at that point.
No, yeah.
And I was like, okay, I think I've done enough in hip hop, doing album covers and logos and things like that, and coming up through the music industry and through skateboarding in the 70s and 80s, and then into the music industry and working on projects, and some things significant, some things not, and really making a disaster of a lot of that. There was enough of if I was an object, I had a provenance. I had been through a few things.
Yeah.
And I thought that if I could create something and really put depth to it, to make a case study out of something, and literally it was I designed this as a case study. that when people stepped up, especially within the sneaker industry, or streetwear as it's called now, back then it was just urban wear, urban clothes. So these are all ways to segregate. If you don't know, it's to say that here's fashion and then here's streetwear. It's always street art. Yeah, it's always a way to. It's art is art. They don't subcategorize anything else just by men's or women's. Anyways, don't get me on my fucking soapbox, right? I lost my train of thought.
It was segueing. Excuse me. Streetwear, urban wear.
They're all labels.
Yeah. Where was I going before that? Shot myself in the foot there. But setting the stage. That's what it was. I was setting the stage that it would be something that I knew would have purpose, and it would have depth to anybody who was mature enough or intelligent enough to a degree, and it would appeal to them. And to someone who came through, certain neighborhoods like I did, and maybe they didn't have that cultural depth, or they weren't worldly, or in some cases, I have some friends that were definitely had autism. Like nowadays we can point it out, but back then just simple cats, good dudes, and they wouldn't get that sort of concept. They could see the parody in the swoosh upside down and the whole Newport thing. That at any level I could connect, and that this was important. But maybe it would only be important to me and 50 other people. Maybe some of the people downtown New York. My friends in Philly. Maybe some friends in LA. Maybe it would only be important to us, but it would be a great conversation piece. Yeah. And if someone decided that this was 2006, so things are starting to cook and people are lining up for shoes, and that's a pretty fairly new phenomenon in the past few years. At that point, that I felt that there was enough substance, enough meaning, enough story, enough of in my resume that if someone said, "Why the fuck would I care about this corny bootleg?" If that's how they felt about it, and why glamorizing sneakers? Cigarettes, which it wasn't, but it could easily be seen that way if you don't have the depth. You just look at it and be like, "You're glamorizing," and it's true to a degree. It's not my intention at all. Listen to me. You can't talk to somebody who's more anti-tobacco than me, but you can't heavy-handed preach to people. Yeah. Don't smoke. Tobacco is wacko. Don't be a butthead. All those billboards I saw growing up. They're ineffective, and they're paid for by the tobacco industry. Exactly. By their guilt money. So you have to kind of bring people in and create something that makes people mad or happy and open the dialogue. And when people would question it, I felt that there was enough people around that knew what I had done that they would go, "Oh, you don't know that guy? You should know what he did, this, and this. And whether you like it or not, this dude is not some knucklehead that just showed up with a bootleg. He's somebody that there's ideation here. There's real concept. There's meaning. There's cultural significance. There's a social statement that needs to be said against many things." And once that was said, someone who, like the early influencer, the adapter, is the person who's not sure if they should like something because how does it work for them? How does it bring clout to them? Social cachet. How does it do that? There'd be somebody there to say, "I know what this person has done." That's important.
Do you think that message was harder to get out back then, though?
Oh, it wasn't. It didn't happen. Fortunately, there was enough people. The only people who really cared understood. Only people who really cared understood that. And then at that point, it was maybe people would care. And when it started cooking really quick, through Kicks in the City, through my boy Rich and other people, there was only a couple of outlets. And I realized oh, I might have something here. And then I started hearing talk that people were going to line up. And I was like, line up? They were doing that for Espo and stuff like that, but these were Nike things. And it wasn't even like, there were some people later on that really thought this was a Nike collaboration. And clearly I could see how that could happen. But it wasn't even that. People were just like, something special about this. And it was really because of what I had saw Nigo do and going to Japan and having that access to the 10th, a Bathing Ape 10-year anniversary where Pharrell had flown out my friends, and by proxy, I was I went along too and was able to get that VIP treatment. And they were just now starting to talk about and release patent leather, babes just.
Right.
And like, I walked away from that experience with like ones that weren't, and a couple of my friends did. And I saw that, but more importantly, I saw the depth of the design of the shops and what he did. And they had a Bape cafe, and they sold Italian food. And I was like, I'm not going to Tokyo for Italian food. And it was wonderful. Yeah. It was good. The whole experience. The least of it was just the simple Bathing Ape stuff, which was really just beautifully simple knockoffs and bootlegs and parodies of things and college parodies. It was almost like, like Streetwear Gap or something. Yeah. It was very conservative considering. And the camo things started to get wackier as the years went on, but initially it's very conservative. And when I saw that, I was like, wow, there's actually room to do something.
Right. So you felt like,
art.
Right. You felt like they were pushing the boundary that Nike was holding back on.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
I mean, Nike was just, imagine if, you show up 500 years in the past with a Lamborghini and 2 machine guns and like bricks of gold and, like an iPhone. It's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how Nike was. They were just so far ahead, not in technology. They were just so far ahead in power, in cultural significance, that they didn't even have the genius to design. Wieden and Kennedy, who was their advertising partner, the same way that Coca-Cola is to McDonald's, as a partner that's not owned, but you can't separate the two, was the brand of the image. And then all these fantastic designers, we all know Tinker Hatfield, and there's a whole host of other fantastic designers who are responsible for that. But it's a perfect storm. It's a tornado and all the right things happening. And when you're making that much money, you can just throw enough things out there and great things really start to happen. And so, they were monsters. It was, Nike's an octopus with tentacles, and everyone else is like, soldier ant with no colony.
Yeah.
It couldn't compete. And so it really was like Nigo in his genius was just like, oh, I'm going to make a luxury version of Nike because Nike's just a blue collar brand. He didn't articulate it in that many, but think about it. I mean, even at best, a $20, $50 markup, $100 markup on a pair of old Air Force Ones or something. And, there was stuff going on. It wasn't completely, but you weren't reselling something for $300 above retail. It just wasn't happening.
Yeah.
$50, maybe $100 but I mean, who's paying that?
Yeah.
And he literally gave Nike a sex appeal that they didn't have. That suddenly people looked at Nike like Louis Vuitton instead of just the pinnacle of sportswear. And we could probably sit in a forum and argue this all day with people, people who defend Nike as if like, it's their father created it. And these guys are crazy. These dudes that are just like, Nike, you can't do anything wrong. I'm like, Nike's smoking crack in the background, but they're great designers. Okay, let's be fair here. They're selling dope in your community. Yeah. Chill out with that.
No, yeah.
And so it really, what Nigo did, and I went over there and I said, wow, this is sexy. This is everything that it should be. Can someone elevate it? And he was doing it. And I thought, now can someone put meaning? Can it have, he's making it adult in the sexy design aspect. And Nike does as well, but he was giving it that sort of value. Even it was just simple, but he was giving it that value. Now, can it have the meaning? Like a Lamborghini is not just a beautiful work of design. It's got something under the hood, and these designers have really done something there, and it's been an evolution. The Bugatti, the Bentley, these are racing cars. And when you get down, when you start talking to the machinists, the mechanics, the guys that work on engines, they go deep and they tell you about these things, and they tell you about the significance and all these things. I thought, well, you know what? If there's some cultural significance here, and if we could add some social depth to it, which Espo really started to touch on in some ways with the Clear Air Force 2, then there maybe something would happen. And here we are. For better or for worse, doesn't, if you don't like it, you don't like it. Totally understand it. And now that there's 1 million bootlegs, I understand that it's, you want to be a purist. But it's all, we're birds of a feather, but this is an art piece. It's a conversation and it's a case study, and it is still a bootleg. But this, you have to understand a really important thing here is that this is a fictitious mashup. This is, I'm watching Nike do mashups, and we've seen them do mashups and collaborations. And this is what I imagine if Nike were to be honest about that mark. This is what I imagined if Nike were to be honest about their marketing practices that are not much different. In fact, they're exactly the same. And we could easily say that, well, sneakers aren't cigarettes. They're not. But I can tell you, I think that tobacco should be illegal, me personally. It's, you know, weed, whatever, we can talk about that different, but I think tobacco should be illegal. However, I don't know morally how a government allows people to do something that has there's no benefit here. There's no nutritional value. It's not like you're just eating fried chicken all day and you die from a heart attack. Okay. But there's a nutritional value that sustains you for a while. This has none of that. And so here we are with something that is really quite ugly. And the tobacco industry is quite ugly. And these guys share the same practices.
Yeah, and you highlight that on the tongue of the shoe.
Oh, I do.
That's the message of, you know, this whole release.
It really, it is. And this is a collaboration of what would be if Nike was honest. And they couldn't. I understand they can't do that. I mean, it's ridiculous. Nike's about health and sports and technology. And Newport is about, you know, Lorillard, their parent company back then, is about, they could say, we're about relief, a break, giving people a breath of fresh air. There's many things you could say. And I can tell you that from a person whose family are drug addicts, alcoholics, and all smoking 2 packs a day, Marlboro, Winston, Benson Hedges, and no Newport people in my family, actually. That wasn't until my neighborhood in Philly. But that if my family only had a tobacco habit, the worst that could happen to me as a kid is that maybe at some point my mom might have died sooner than she did, of which she was in part complications from smoking. And my aunt and my sister, who has a double mastectomy, if you don't know what that is, both her breasts are removed from smoking. That Nike, if they were really being honest, that the tobacco, and if we really look at the tobacco industry, if it was just that, tobacco doesn't do half the damage that many other things do. I'm not defending tobacco. I staunchly believe it should be illegal. And I have felt that for decades, because especially the way it's personally affected me. But Nike, easily, because of their marketing practices, because of their partners in their marketing practices, and Adidas too, and whoever else, but Nike is, you know, the king of the castle here, king in the castle, has created an environment where they, like tobacco, like fast food, take a position like, hey, I'm not telling you to go spend your paycheck. I'm not telling you to spend your baby's formula money. I'm not telling you to, you know, hawk your house for something. That's ridiculous. That's irresponsible. But I've never gotten a pair of shoes that came with a pamphlet. You know, even gambling says, you know, if you have a problem, go do this. And it's sneakers. That's ridiculous to think of. But we know. And now here we are in this resale market with all these platforms. It is money, and it's filled with desperation. And it's filled with people who will sell their soul.
Yeah.
And you think it's nothing, but if you spend $300 on a pair of Jordans, you're probably neglecting your fiscal responsibility to yourself, your family, maybe your children, and God knows who else.
Yeah.
And so everything in moderation and responsibly. But that's the point. Is that you don't think about that with T-shirts. Nobody's, you know, putting themselves into, you know, their house isn't being foreclosed on because of T-shirts. And not to say they are with sneakers, but there is a danger in creating so much love and desire to work so hard at the marketing, to do so well to make people want something so much and then condone the resale market, which is fine. I'm not going to hustle. I'm in a resale place here. But to not acknowledge it, to not say, hey, you know what? We acknowledge that we're part of a problem and this is a dirty part of the business we want to fix. And the only reason that they would want to fix it is to control.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's it. And so this is that mashup about, the good and the bad.
Mm-hmm.
And if Nike were being honest, they would have created this. They don't seem to push back too much when people call the Heineken dunk. It's officially not a Heineken thing, and that's not what they call it.
Yeah.
Right.
They don't see them trying to cease and desist everybody who says, like, don't equate us with alcohol. Don't do that. And quite frankly, in Nike's credit, they didn't have much problem. They were just like, look, man, you can't bootleg. You can't turn the mark upside down. You can't, come on, guy. I was like, fair enough. I tried. And I said, I knew this was all part of, you can see other interviews and stuff and me talking about that, but I did, it was all intentional. But it was the tobacco industry. It was Lorillard specifically that had the biggest problem, and only because they're scared of the federal government coming in and finding them $10 million because I sold these and maybe a 16-year-old bought them.
Yeah.
Right.
But you know how many conversations I've had about these, about the dangers and the ugliness of both companies and the beauty of Newport's branding and how that lured people in to kill them.
Yeah.
There's no regret here. I've only a couple of things I wish I would have done a little better, but there's no regret. And the dialogue that this has created, whether you love me or hate me, or you see me as, the catalyst for a lot of bad things, you have to understand what this is. This is a social statement. It is a case study in both marketing, advertising, and conscious. And when you work with enough companies that are devoid of that conscious, who try to pretend that they have that conscious, you have to sell a part of your soul to continue. And I don't have a love of money. I need money to pay my bills. I do not have a love for money. I've been homeless as a child, and I will fucking be homeless again before I sell my soul for a swoosh.
I think the only time that like big tobacco took a hit in more recent years was like the Juul, where they were
but they own that now too.
And it's
all the ads and all that.
I believe in New York and like other states it's deemed illegal, but it was because they were like putting it on TikTok and like changing the colors and like having these great fruitful flavors and all this other like stuff that like who's your real target market and like audience at that point, you know what I mean?
It's the same susceptible folk. We've all been there, we've all been susceptible. We may be conscious now, but
yeah. And then like on Nike's side, more recent, they have this whole fake beef, going on with Travis and John over the Mac attack or the Cactus Jack attack. Jesus. And it's like a giant ploy and like a giant like, whatever, but like why?
People don't know this, and there might be a couple clips online, and I've never talked about it. We did they're very minimal initial viral guerrilla marketing. Now they call it experiential marketing for I don't know what year this was. Maybe it was 2003, 4, 5. Mac Attack relaunch then.
Mm-hmm.
We did the viral marketing, street marketing for it. And it was, it's a brilliant era. And now they've relaunched it again. And now here we are. And they're going through all of this and Nike and all their hypocrisy and, this, don't you dare talk back to us. It's a little ridiculous. And I don't know. I have some very interesting theories and some things on paper and not like proof of, Area 51 or something. It's just theories of how this is all sort of playing out and how it's constructed. And it's a very interesting, I think there's a bit of a scramble going on. And I don't know it to be true, but there's a bit of a scramble. And authenticity is going to come down to literally what was in somebody's hand and that I gave to you and somebody documented it.
Yeah.
And even then, it's AI, it's anything. It's how do we even know that one was real that they gave? But I think that Nike's, they're not they're not in fear of their life, but they've got to look down the road a little bit and go all access to everything, and anybody can produce anything at the snap of a figure in a virtual way, and artificial intelligence working on people's behalf, and people having factories in their garages.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That this is a very scary prospect for these guys, because it's going to come down to the garments, the actual physical things mean so much less than their provenance, than the outlets that they come through, so that you can prove. It's like things have got to come with a smart contract. They've got to come through the blockchain and be so undeniably true in the physical purchase. You've got to see, there's got to be the blockchain certificate, that almost comes with it.
Right.
And even then, because at some point, I mean, everything's legit.
No, yeah.
I mean, these things are bootlegged, bootlegs of the bootleg.
Yeah.
And they're terrible. They're not good. I put in certain things in there so I would know.
Mm-hmm.
And they could get really good and they still wouldn't know. But I mean, they're just terrible.
Yeah.
At some point, you're just going to like an idea and create it at home. And they're going to sell you, the smart contract to legitimize it, to say, here's my floating 3-dimensional, smart contract on the blockchain that you can press this button and see that it authenticates this item. Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, they do it a lot with garments and like art and like art figures and stuff like that. But
they're putting chips in shoes.
Yeah, like RFID chips.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty common where you just
But
put your
now-
phone up. Yeah.
yeah,
But now they're specifying it to accounts.
they started doing that in the size tags.
Yeah.
So like the RFID.
Oh yeah. But
Yeah, that's why like to give you a back to the
get ready, boys.
back to the evil roots of
Yeah.
this industry. We've gone to different places where like the backdooring of today is not just like, hey, like open the back door. It's like 20 people ripping off, size tags and like making sure that label stays, on station and stuff like that. And like it's a very intricate process these days. But like for the most part, like even like with like replicas or like fakes or whatever you deem them, they've become to the point where like, the actual person who made the real shoe goes on break and then like texts their cousin like the blueprints, and then all of a sudden like they have the blueprints and they just make it across the street with the same exact leather and the same blue and the same hue and stuff like that. It's crazy.
Go across the street and replicate it.
It's to the point where like people are afraid to buy like early pairs anymore, because it's like almost like for instance, like you'll have the I remember, what was it, like the Aminier 4 was coming out, and like people were like starting to put like their like, hey, like this is my thought process because I saw the different colors, on the SKUs, and I know like whatever, and like they made their own version, like, and they just did it on Photoshop.
Yeah.
2 hours later, people were getting shipped this shoe that didn't exist.
Yeah.
And like, YouTubers,
I know a couple of those dudes.
YouTubers are like, oh, this is
not for that specific thing,
Yeah,
but I know
yeah.
the guys that are turning things over.
and
instantly.
like,
they seek me out. I'm like a figure for some reason. I'm like, but
yeah,
fucking, they've been bootleg. I'm still trying to get a pair of the Jordan 11s with the Louis Vuitton print, from like 2001 or something like that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're
But
good.
it's just.
And it's to the point where like these people are like, like, hey, like this is the new thing. It's coming out in
Yeah.
3 months. And then in 3 months, it's completely different. They're like, like,
But that to me, I mean, if you're a real aficionado, you want the one of ones.
mhm.
You
Oh,
want
yeah.
the concept. You want these if you could see somewhere, I have photos, like internet pulls and finds of like bootlegs of like all the Jordan stuff in the early eBay days, and
Yeah.
stuff, and it's just brilliant.
yeah,
Like it's the stuff that Virgil ended up doing,
Yeah.
mhm.
No.
and he knows that, and I wish he was here because we would have had those conversations for sure. I would have definitely been like, look, man,
Nah,
you
yeah.
know what? Because me and him talked about Canal Street
Mhm.
and in depth with other friends,
Yeah.
and during the pandemic specifically, we were all locked down and we were all getting on platforms to talk. And Canal Street is so significant. It really is a place that determines value
Mhm.
because that you've done something right
If
when
you're,
it shows up on Canal Street.
yeah,
Yeah, no.
it's like the
And
biggest flattery.
It's a validator, and you see the mutation. Like if they've stolen your product and they've done something interesting with it, you have all the right in the world to now be influenced by their influence. You know, like you influence them, they influence you back, and it's this weird, crazy, incestuous situation where, you know, the chicken and the egg, the horse and the cart.
Yeah.
And at some point it gets blurry, and you see it in Nike's, their design teams, even for their GR stuff. You're like,
yeah, for sure.
These are people who might be 35 now. They've grown up in the sneaker game, whether he even cared about it or not. They can look around and be influenced by things that, you know, I did or somebody else did or Espo did, or, you know, they may not even realize how Tinker's influencing them in ways that they didn't come through a Nike college. They got hired for a job.
Right.
No, yeah.
That looks like a cool colorway, paint by number.
Yeah.
You know?
No, yeah. The biggest like takeaway between that kind of dialogue is like once the Espo 2 or the Espo came out, you know, people started bootlegging 7s, and they were like, you know, clear 7s, and like
that was such a great moment.
God forbid when
So
you know, the Fantastic Four Invisible Woman came out, there was
the Air Force,
85 different iterations and leathers and patent leathers, and you know,
what's the shoe that got that? The Prada.
Yeah.
Remember there was like every colorway in that Prada?
Yeah.
And it was such a crazy looking shoe anyways. It was like, you know, where were you from that you wore that? You know, and I had friends that wore it. It was like such a hood classic, right?
Yeah.
I never could stand it.
Yeah.
And I just felt like, you know, that I was some dude that needed to be in Ibiza, you know, like, you know, listening to like Hard House or something. It was such a weird shoe, but it was so culturally significant, and it showed us that this shoe really appealed to the hood, and the hood wanted more. And once again, as the hood always does, it creates the substance and the flavor of so much, and other people can then take it and over intellectualize it and justify it. But the hood, you know, music forms, culture always comes out of this sort of struggle. And in America, we have such a history of that, and particularly coming from Black neighborhoods and Hispanic neighborhoods where we're not really acknowledging that, right? But come full circle, Nigo, he knew that. It's like, yeah, man, why don't we have this in purple? And I remember sitting there waiting, like, will the Nike gods give us a cool colorway this season of that one Air Force High with the strap on? Oh, please, I hope maybe a blue this season.
Yeah.
No, you have not earned. You're on my naughty list. You will not get purple or blue. Yeah. Maybe next year we'll do this for you. And Nigo's like, yeah.
Here you go.
This is what the hood needs.
Yeah.
And he was looking at it from the Japanese perspective, right? Which is like, they admire all those great things about America.
Exactly.
You know, they really, you know, drill down on culture no matter where it is in the world. And they drill down and they understand what is the best. If they're into wine, they know the best, you know, the best vineyards. If they're into sneakers, they know the best. They know the time, the best hip hop, the best music, the best jazz, you know, double Dutch champs in Japan, you know, like this, it's insane. And it's such an incredible culture. And you see that in Nigo's approach, which is, these are not incredible things he did. He's like, you know, you have something great here and you're not pushing it far enough. Now we see Nike scrambling and in collaborations from, you know, Travis Scott to Virgil to, you know, Pata and anybody, where they're allowing these people to bring the cultural relevance that is beyond the in-house designers and beyond, you know, Wieden and Kennedy, you know, their advertising partner, and do these fantastic things. And it was really, I think many people have thought about this, but Nigo had the audacity
to execute,
the fucking audacity. And that was just like, and this man understands taste, even if he's making tasteless things, you know.
It still appeals to someone.
You know, my slogan, quality goods for tasteless needs, back then was and it was really founded on that it was like, here are these horrible, you know, sort of like terrible things that you wouldn't wear at the country club and you wouldn't do, but they're absolutely at home in the country club. Right. You know, they're just, it's the streets version of creating their museum pieces. And Nigo is a perfect curator. Yeah. And when I saw that, I was like, yeah. And now it's time to go further. Let's add the tank up. So this is a blueprint. It's not a blueprint to just replicate that for your own pocket. And let me do my version of the menthols and line my pocket with some money. It's a blueprint. It's a blueprint in depth. It's a blueprint in design and art. This is not, I didn't design a shoe. Duh. The fuck? I can design a shoe. You think all the design work I've done, I'm trained. But no, you're not buying that. Nobody's buying that.
No.
Maybe if you thought there was some resale value, but nobody's buying that. What it was is that we don't put any pressure on somebody when there's the wingtip, the Oxford, the penny loafer. Everybody can do their version of the penny loafer. The Air Force One is the hood's penny loafer. It's the wingtip. It's the Oxford. It is a standard. You don't get it mad at Vans when you see other companies do the version of Vans. Vans took that from Converse.
Yeah,
I have ads that go back before Vans started of them selling the what became the Authentic or the Era model, which is that classic deck shoe.
Yeah.
A topsider. If Sperry does it, if Ralph Lauren does it, nobody questions it. So Nigo, I think probably maybe he wouldn't articulate it that way, but I certainly saw it that way. And I know Espo thinks the same way. Like all of us, we just saw it as, this is the shoe that you can wear to the funeral if it's in black, or wear to the wedding if it's in white. It is the inner city shoe. It's the sneaker shoe. And to act like it shouldn't be, changed and interpreted, it's just a ridiculous conversation at this point. Are we going to have this conversation 100 years from now? We're all dead. Or are they still going to be like, you don't touch the Air Force One. You don't do it. Nike's got tons of IP.
Yeah.
Endless IP. They've done it. They've done it. They did it. More than the Dunk. The Air Force One is that shoe. It goes across every generation that has touched it. If you don't know what to do, get an Air Force One. Wear that.
Yep.
If you don't know how to wear a suit, your first time in a suit, you don't feel comfortable in them shoes, get a pair of Air Force Ones. Black or white.
That's true.
It's all you're ever going to need. There's the interpretation of it. And if you have some invested interest in your resale, and I'm somehow devaluing that for you, I apologize. However,
I don't think so.
You need to buy art that has meaning.
Yeah.
And not shoes that have a shelf life.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Word.
I love that you bring up the cultural significance, between the Air Force and, so many different parts of the world. But do you think like fashion design is based more in creativity or marketing?
Well, when we say fashion, we generally are using a term that's business oriented, I think.
Right.
Art and commerce have always seemed to exist in some sort of way, right? And if I work with friends who like Espo, successful artists, and I know people at varying degrees of that success who have made good money. Art needs its benefactors. Art exists. Everything is art. This carpet is art. This sneaker, the pants, the food, everything is art. Your shitty air conditioner hanging in your window is art. It's all required some sort of design, from the actual industrial design to the cosmetic design to the package design. All of it is art, right? And diamonds are art, right? You find them. People die for them. They cut them. The artists, they cut all the different angles to it, and give it value. There's just art in every process, and there's no business that doesn't need it in some crude, at least, basic way, right? So, fashion. I don't really know anybody that's like fashion for fashion. I'm probably a little bit more like that. People look at me as a goofball. I don't feel peer pressure that way. I never did. The way I grew up, I had to slap that and duck it and dodge it, And so I think for me, it's more of an expression. This is a Guyanese flag for a friend of mine who died a couple of years ago, who was Guyanese and Puerto Rican, but he was culturally raised Guyanese. And this, it's a goofy, fun thing. It's not a bow tie. It's a bandana. It's like, like a classic Cripper Blood bandana, but it's the flag in a bandana form. And I rep it for him. And for me, it's a fashion statement for me that has meaning and ties back to something that's very important to me. And then I do it in this goofy way. It's almost like a bow tie, but it's just a bandana. Instead of doing it cowboy style,
Right.
hanging, I've done it this way. And it's really a byproduct of winter. It's colder. I'm buttoning it up. Instead of being inside the collar, it's outside.
Right.
And I think that's fashion, right? But and style, style is something it's hard to buy. Fashion is easy to buy. And the business of fashion is like, this is what everybody's doing. All the women, everybody gets in line and wears the black leather pant or the pleather pant. And they get the Air Force One. That's the dirty, white on white. And I think fashion wouldn't really exist without the business of it. Because then it comes down to a very individual thing. And then, if we go back, hundreds of years, let's say a couple hundred years, and it comes down to like, I need a smart suit or whatever somebody was wearing. You had to go to a tailor and save up your money. But you saw that because you saw somebody else wear it. So that is the business of it, right?
Right.
And it's not like we're out there sewing together bearskin. You would look at somebody else in your tribe or something and go, oh, yeah.
Oh, they weren't. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think they kind of go hand in hand. But unfortunately, when the artistic expression is pulled out of it, and it's made, and I think streetwear suffers from that severely, is that when it's made for the sole point of commerce, it loses a lot. Yeah. And I think if you're just an artist running off and painting and doing whatever you're designing, that's easy. Whether people like it or not, whether it's good or not, doesn't matter. And I think if you're over here doing the business, that's its own thing. The hard part is to try and find the common ground. As a commercial artist myself, and as dealing in graphic design primarily, but fine art and other things, this is an expression of all of that. You want to, at the very least, look at yourself as your client, and you want to try to interpret the task and say, okay, what are the challenges? I need to do this, 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 and this. And how do I find? You're going to have to compromise. And with the business of it, too much compromise in one way, and when you're only doing it for yourself, there's probably not enough compromise to rein you in. And in this, I had to serve many gods. I had to serve, dudes from my hood to people that I've, come to respect and know, who are accomplished, people with much, higher IQs than I'll ever have, and, brilliant, and then try to explain it from a commercial standpoint, from an artistic standpoint, in the context of its history, and from sneakers to art. It's a lot of challenges, and to communicate that to a lot of different people, that's the challenge. That's the task. That's the art of the business. It's finding that common ground. So I think, to long-winded way to say, yes, fashion and commerce and business, they do go hand in hand, and they make beautiful art. There'd be no Louis Vuitton steamer trunk, travel trunk, if there wasn't a business for it. And then in that is I got to buy a trunk anyways. This one sets me apart, whether it's because of money, and that's the easiest way. But style, you go, this style sets me apart. I'm not afraid to step onto this cruise ship with my, wooden trunk and leather buckles, and stand out from the norm. Take some balls to do that.
I wanted to talk about the belts that you've made
for
D and Ricky.
Oh yeah, D and Ricky, yeah. The Lego belts.
The Lego belts, and then you did the NES controller.
NES controller.
Yeah, because they had some like cheaply made like aluminum clasp or something.
Yeah, they had ones from Hot Topic. And the thing, like D and Ricky, they're from the projects in Staten Island. And I mean, it's Staten Island. It's like being in another universe, It's like like you can get trapped out there, and kids don't really go and get on the boat and come here at 15, 16 years old like they did 14. And they would go to the mall, Staten Island Mall, and they knew somebody. They would steal shit out of the Hot Topic or like work a plug, like somebody that worked there. And so they had all this really ridiculous Hot Topic shit, which was really dope at their age for them in Staten Island, but not downtown New York dope, Manhattan. But you could see that they were thinking. And at one point I did a pitch to Jay Allard, who is the partner in Xbox with Bill Gates, who created the Xbox for Bill Gates. And I don't know how the fuck I managed that, but we got we got in there and pitched it and won. But I went in there and this was again before the term street wear. I went in there and I stenciled, I did graffiti type shit. I cut out stencils of what was this proposed. The Xbox hadn't been launched yet.
Right.
Wait, who had it? It had, excuse me. Then they were going into the second phase and it hadn't been announced what it would be called. It was a code name. And so I went in there with this code symbol that I had signed a non-disclosure agreement, and I stenciled stuff onto like thrift clothing, and I took the first Xbox
the controller, right?
And I ripped it apart, looking at D and Ricky's little terrible belt buckle thing, and I filled it with foam on the back. I didn't even know to like just rivet it and do all this stuff. I just opened it up, took the faceplate, filled it with foam, and then fixed it to like a typical military slide buckle. And went in there with a bunch of stuff and told them, like, this is how we can affect culture. This is how we can affect, this is how we can do viral marketing, and start something on a real micro level that can become macro when you go to your release. And he loved it. And he was a fan of Espo's art. And it was, it was like this guy had done his homework. And here, I mean, this is a dude at the top.
Yeah.
I mean, Xbox, the guy that created Xbox. And, he knew these little cultural nuances and that we were a part of. And he liked that. When I came back, D and Ricky, I was like, yeah, look, I did this and I did that. And you guys, I'm mentoring them at this point, and their grandmother was sweet enough to, be cool, and the rest of his family, siblings. And I said, hey, man, they were like, oh, how can we wear that? And I was like, this makes sense for you. And then we started thinking about it and was like, I think this can be your thing. And then they're creative, because we were looking for somewhere, like we were using them like interns basically. And we were like, they had so much charisma and flavor and style. And we thought, okay, this could be it. So the belts sort of became their thing. And it was Ricky specifically. They had met, they were becoming like sort of downtown darlings, where they were like meeting all the right fashion people and art and culture and music. And they met Marc Jacobs' partner, and his partner really liked the belt buckle, because Ricky had come up with like, let's put Legos on the belt buckle. And so we found a way to put them together and rivet them into the belt in a solid kind of a way, into the buckle rather. And he loved that. And, the controllers were whatever. And we did like little baby Jordan soles and things like that. But he really liked that. I mean, it was a much more interesting design. And he said, he brought them to Marc Jacobs, and Marc Jacobs said, I'd like to do the accessories for my runway show. And he was like, can you make more of those and make some of these things, and brooches and barrettes and headband type things for his models? And they did. And that's it. I mean, they were already getting on the map with that stuff by having that, wearing that stuff. But D and Ricky, it just happened in the living room, in my living room. The same place where I sliced up put together these boxes and sliced up the silver paper. I don't know if you can still see it there.
Yeah.
That classic. That was wrapping paper that I ordered from France. Maybe it might have been shipped out of Paris. I don't even know, but I forget. And then I sat in my home and carved it up on the floor. Like all the best shit just happens being pure and scrappy.
Yeah.
And their stuff. And D and Ricky, whether you, again, it's like me, whether you love them or hate them. These are kids that had no chance. I didn't give them a chance. They were brilliant in their own way. No education, didn't even graduate high school, no formal design education, no sort of like mind to hand creative process. They're just dudes that, made their way out, made their way into Manhattan, and made their way to that Espo release and introduced themselves to me and Espo. And their tenacity is bigger than their inabilities and their lack of education. And they've never had real jobs since they were 15. They've been just chasing a dream and doing stuff, winning, failing, like we all do, and doing it all, and still selling the brooches and still selling
the Lego hearts,
that you saw Kanye wear, and that you see Questlove still wear different brooches and some of the plushy brooches. And it's just, it's a certain amount of taking chance. And there's no success without being a little corny. You have to be true success requires corny. You can be You can be an icon that no one ever knew about until you're dead and had no commercial success, and that's great too. But most people aren't even that. They're not even taking that risk. They're just armchair analysts being angry and criticizing and saying how it could have been, and not taking that risk. So you have to take that risk, and a little bit of corniness comes with it. It's a painful truth, but if you don't add a little bit of them cornflakes into your recipe, then all the cornflakes ain't buying your shit.
Yeah. Makes sense.
How's that answer the belt question? Man, I'm crazy.
I think that, I think it's nice that people are still rooted in their own individuality, because it's like, I feel like that's a lost art now. Everyone tries to be like the next person.
You say that, and a lot of people say that, and I've had people come up to me, and even 10 years ago, people were like, man, the sneaker game is different. It's changed. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, you're 20 or you're 30. Like, first of all, music has always been bad, and good music is few and far between. Now, if we go back to the 90s and we sit there and we go, man, the 90s were incredible. I had a magazine with my partners, with my friends, and they were sending us every kind of music you could imagine. Trash on trash. We had trash bags full of that trash. There's always far more trash than there is quality. But when you look back at a decade, if you look back at fashion, if you look back at sneakers, you look back at music, you can always isolate the greatest hits. And you can go, man, where would we be without these 30 albums from the 90s? Oh yeah, but there were 30,000 artists in the 90s, and it was terrible. And there's some things that are just so good that will never see the light of day. A couple demos that never made it. A couple of things that flopped out for whatever reason commercially, but are just gems. And so I'm not saying that you're wrong.
No.
But
I get what you're saying.
It's always been whack, and it's always been great, and it's just changes.
Yeah.
Right.
And with those changes, we see a death to certain things, and we see a birth. I remember being a teenager, and then really somewhere around the transition of 2021, just going, the only way I'm not going to be that grumpy old dude on the corner like this YouTube shit and this hip hop, this ain't hip hop, that's not real hip hop, and all that type of shit that people do, is to not get stuck.
Yeah.
Is to know that everything has a shelf life. Every time, every era, every moment, every product, every person, every relationship, everything has a shelf life. This store has a shelf life. It does. It may be 100 years from now. You may build a retail empire. It could be a year from now. But to not admit that to yourself is stupid. And so you just keep moving along and stay fluid.
Yeah, no.
You don't, I'm not trying to be young, I'm just recognizing that I don't have to be rigid and bitter, and that I can appreciate all my eras, all the decades, and appreciate what's coming, and be able to talk to somebody who's 18, 16. You can talk to, somebody who's 80, 90. There's wisdom to be had in all of it, and lessons to be given and learned. And it's true in that is that, things are lost. They've always been lost. And there's more music than there's ever been. So there'll be more crap than there's ever been. But there's also more good than there's ever been. And it's the same thing with sneakers. Sneakers, you go, oh my God, there's so much crap out there. But we have so much more good shit than we ever used to have. So many good collaborations. Happy accidents, moments of accidental genius, intentional genius. Nike's, what do they put out? 5,000 different silhouettes. Who the hell knows what they've done, right? All of those have flopped. There's only a few that we're talking about. There's only a few on these shelves that we care about.
That's true.
And so it's not like things were better back then. People are just trying to find their way. I never liked any of these LeBrons. But there's some classics there, and people really identify. But the LeBron. But the Iverson. To me, trash. But I understand what that means to somebody else, and through their eyes, I look at it and go, oh, but you know what? This is good. It's just I didn't emotionally attach to it at a vulnerable age, and see it as something significant. I don't care about sports, so no sports player can make a shoe that I don't give a fuck about. It's either it looks good to me or it doesn't. But Jordan's accomplishments, Kobe's accomplishments don't mean anything to me in terms of who designed that shoe and why it looks the way it does.
Yeah.
So anyways, I think if you look at the Yeezy, it looks back at things, and it's also a modern interpretation of old things. And his politics and madness aside, we can just look at that shoe for what it is and go, okay, it's old and new, so it's a modern classic.
Makes sense.
But and again, whether you like the dude or not, that's for you to wrangle, each individual person to wrangle with. Do you listen to somebody's music who has done something questionable? How do you separate the art from the man? It's a tough thing. I'm not good enough. I'll stop appreciating somebody's art if they offend me personally. Mm-hmm. But I do question that within myself. So yeah, again, to your point, again and again and again. Things are not the way they used to be, and they shouldn't be.
What are your thoughts on like today's like nuance of, different designers coming out, and for lack of better terminology, like bootlegging, is a resurgency now where like Nike's going back and attacking these and like either making them quiet or, settling or whatever the case may be. And late, it's like, the Warren Lourdeses of the world, the John Geigers of the world, the Cool Kais of the world. Like, what are your thoughts on like that, not nuance, but like that resurgency of like Nike giving a fuck about their IPs, and like maybe they're lacking in like, in my opinion, they're lacking in innovation. So like, let's, now attack at our latest, for, whatever their gimmick is behind it, like their new, competitor per se, that they can just knock off the board and automatically.
Well, you say some really interesting things there, and I think we've all been saying them, and I think you probably talk to people on social media, and everybody's kind of saying the same thing, right? And the first thing you hear people say, the Nike purists, the kids protecting investments, or the easiest thing to say is like, get your own idea, guy. And I mean, we could be here all day talking about how much Nike is stolen, and that doesn't really solve the argument. Everybody's already numb to that statement, right? Even though it's very, very true. The Air Force One was taken from a boot. It was completely taken from a boot. That is an absolute fact. And if you go, and if some of you are tenacious enough, go find the gent who designed the Air Force One and, lean on him. But he's talked about it. It's the truth. We look at the Air Force One, we look at the Dunk. It's all the same shoe. Mm-hmm. The Vandal, it's all the same shoe. And if you go back, if you look at the era that came out in, if you go back and look at kangaroo boots and all of these, they were all sort of doing this thing, which the what we call the toe box, the Vamp and the mud guard here. That was a trend, and all businesses follow the trends to sell. Nike could be selling toilet seats; they don't give a fuck. They honestly don't give a fuck, and they prove it in so many different ways. They just have their lane, and they're sticking to it for the most part. But they'll sell, if suddenly it was like the style to have a toilet seat hanging off of this, you think they're not going to make it and sell it? Damn fucking right they are. The bootleg, this is a conversation that is, it's deep. It's a deep conversation, question to ask, because we are in a very politically divided and charged environment. And a lot of the people who are very engaged in the business of reselling and creating are very conservative. And then there's a lot of people that are very liberal. And so we're very polarized. It's now part of sneaker culture. And doesn't necessarily get involved, but it's quick. Suddenly you see all these guys who love hip hop and love streetwear and fashion suddenly are like, there's no racism. Like really crazy statements. You are both men of color in your own way. You fucking know there's racism. Oh, yeah. You've heard it come out of people's mouths, and not once. So we're in a very interesting time of denial, white denial specifically. And that's not me pandering and catering. I'm a white man. I get it. I also know I've watched, because of the neighborhoods I've lived in, I've seen people held back. Physically, literally in some cases. And when we talk about this, I know this seems like this is a stretch, but let's look at a guy like Kai. He's stealing IP. He's finding a lane. Drug dealers didn't invent cocaine. They're producing it. They're selling it. It's just a very, very weird argument. And then we have, we get to something that's really legitimate in its own way. That's a good, honest living. And here's this man, a black man, who has true independence. And he's had to steal IP to get there. Does this have any impact on Nike? Not one bit. Nothing. Nothing of any significance financially. Nothing they could even measure. What are they really protecting here? What are we talking about? I don't know what we're talking about. But I do know that a company that has made its money off of black people, at the very least Jordan, has some sort of social obligation to create opportunity. And does that mean you have to be the best of the best of a person of color or white in order to only be blessed? That was the only way. And here's a man who is coming up through the amateur ranks, through street ball, to try and get to the NBA. He may be seen as not having the sophistication, which is not true. But let's just say, he's doing his thing. He's making beautiful colorways. Mm-hmm. Some of his colorways, Nike could really, he's taken what Nigo's done and run. Not all of them are great. Not all of anything anybody does, but Kai has done some really interesting things. We can talk about the silhouette. We can talk about, all the things that aren't right. But he's in the AAA ball. He's down there balling. He's the one guy that you could put on your fucking team and put on with other people on your team and make something incredible. Signing a guy like Kai is like signing any dude that's dribbling a basketball who's just so good he didn't need college. Now, I'm not saying he's got this industrial design certificate. He's not Tinker Hatfield. Mm-hmm. He's not really a designer in that way. But in many ways, Virgil is that. Virgil has a certain level of sophistication, education. He has a degree in architecture. He understands. I mean, he's a cultural phenomenon. There's never really going to be somebody like him do what he's done, open doors the way he has. But here's an opportunity for Nike to go, you know what? AAA, we're going to sign him as like a college guy. Mm-hmm. Bring Kai in, give him some free reign, and go. But what is the ego here? If he went to them, or if they went to him and gave him an offer he couldn't refuse, I don't know that he'd take it, because I know he really enjoys being the character that he is. The enemy, they've made him a star. Yeah. And I respect it. Yeah. I love the guy for what he's doing. I don't care. His art, let's put that aside. What he represents, the same way D and Ricky. There's black men that are getting past a point for whatever reason, whatever you believe, whatever your politics are, and you believe that whether he had a fair shake or whatever, he's overcome a certain level of adversity and a lack of education to get somewhere that nobody's been. Mm-hmm. Certainly not a black man. Even Nigo's out there in Japan getting massaged. Mm-hmm. This dude, Nike could sign him and look at him as a amateur athlete that they're taking from the ground up. They put money and resources behind him and see what he can do. How is that any different than Travis Scott? Mm-hmm. How is it any different? Travis Scott is talking about, women in derogatory ways, talking about drugs, violence, talk about anything he wants. And he can also be esoteric and, different and playful. But Nike doesn't have a problem with that. Yeah. Doesn't have a problem when you're talking about something that's destructive potentially. I'm not saying I like Travis Scott personally.
No, yeah,
I like his
sure.
music. I like everything he's doing. It's just I'm on board. I don't really care.
Yeah.
Whatever doesn't work, I don't care. I don't even look at that. I look at the stuff that does. But here, how is it any different?
Yeah.
Because your egos are involved, Nike. Because your egos are involved. What are we talking about here? You're trying to oppress this guy? Oh, and then everybody, well, he's stealing. Motherfucker. Anybody that's ever said that to me about anybody else or about me, I look at them from head to toe, and they don't got an original idea on their body. Not one original garment they produced, not any original idea. Every look they have looks like they went into an Applebee's and chose the fucking picture and said, that's me.
Yeah.
Does Kai, can Kai be so much more? Should he be so much more? Absolutely he should.
Yeah, I agree.
And he should be given the platform to do it because he's shown that he's got a fucking audience. The only reason they signed Jordan is because he has an audience. The only reason they collaborate with Virgil or with Travis Scott. And there's a big difference between Travis Scott and Virgil because Virgil is in many ways a traditional sort of garment guy, you know, in many ways, or learned, self-taught. He is, I mean, you wouldn't think of Virgil for designing your wedding dress or your, but you do now.
Yeah.
Off-White never would have said, could you design a wedding dress for me based on that t-shirt? But there's a certain level of sophistication in the way that Virgil talked, and because he has a little bit of a pedigree, right? And the way he came through traditional education. But Kai, man, get it. You're not going to give it to you. Get it. I've told this to Kai.
Nice.
That's
great.
We try to tell him anytime he comes in. He's from Jersey City.
I know. Yeah. Base of operations here. This is no slouch, man.
No, yeah.
This is no slouch. And I again, separate yourselves from what you think is aesthetically pleasing and what you think is right or wrong, and just look at the situation and try and get into somebody else's shoes. Come on. Like, how stupid does this conversation have to be? It's nothing, man. The sneaker industry, streetwear is just filled with opinions of people who are barely smart enough to get themselves dressed. And they all regurgitate the same exact opinion, positively or negatively. And what I'm looking for is sincere thought, a new perspective, a new idea. Don't regurgitate pro or con at me. And this, you know, when we look across the board, there's tons of horrible bootlegs for no other reason than they're just terrible and they make money for whatever. And, you know, originality is a very subjective thing.
Yeah.
It's very subjective. If you're a grown man in any sort of professional industry where you're trying to carve your way through, you are not rewarded. You come from an educational system from childhood that tells you that when you take a chance and the answer ends up not being correct, you are penalized. You are given a bad grade and you are ostracized and punished for it. So you better fall in line like a good employee.
Yeah.
Like a good fucking employee, and keep your mouth shut and be thankful that you're even somewhere on the plantation for everybody.
Yeah.
And so, you know, here's an opportunity of a man who's using their own guns against them. And they could be allies. Nike's in a position where they've got an entire, like a training farm. They've got like a recruiting system down there. They need scouts on the ground looking for genius. The same way that NBA scouts and college scouts are down there looking at high schools, even junior high if you're that talented.
Yeah. No, yeah. I think Sean Williams says that a lot, where like, you know, even with his academy, you know, like there's so many different people that would love to, you know, work for the Nikes of the world.
Yes.
They don't know how to. You know what I mean? It's beyond like, let me just submit an application. You know what I mean? There's people who are like, hey, like, you know, I'm great at designing, I'm great at this, I'm great at that. But like, unless I'm going into a Nike store, like, how am I supposed to get in touch with someone in Portland? Like, I don't know.
How do you go from, you know, your Amazon job
exactly
to showing really what you're worth? And because you are worth something.
Yeah.
And there's always more talented people than the people working anywhere. There's always someone better. There's always somebody better than you, no matter how high up you go.
Yeah.
Don't let the fucking awards and the money, make you feel that there isn't somebody better than you, because there is. There always is. It's just a matter of whether somebody finds them. Maybe in another country on a dirt road.
Yeah, but I don't think that's a reason to, turn away from a challenge like that. I think that's
absolutely.
But don't get me wrong. People are demotivated by that, and people do end up giving up for reasons.
And
like
why
that.
wouldn't they? Right?
No, I know.
It's disheartening.
Yeah, but I think you put that energy somewhere positive.
Yeah,
that's definitely somewhere that'll take you. Sky's the limit at that point.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I don't. It's just we're having the same conversations over and over and over and over and over again. Everybody pointing fingers and all the truths and lies that live within these fucking regurgitated, circular, revolving and not evolving conversations.
Yeah.
But we really need to start looking at, like, man, what would happen if we gave people this access? Is it threatening? And, an important thing there to what you're saying is that it's easy to get discouraged. Because you're Dominican and Italian, but you identify as Dominican. You speak Spanish?
Yeah.
Okay. And you, sir?
I'm Peruvian.
Peruvian, okay. Yeah. And you speak Spanish?
Yeah.
And so you guys feel connected to your cultures?
Mm-hmm.
Now, when given an opportunity, now not you guys, like we're all in this sort of multicultural world together. We've sort of escaped in a way and can go back to certain communities, and particularly you two, right? You have a very strong sense of identity. You have two flags to wave very proudly. And when Dominicans and Peruvians are hiring, they hire their own. And that seems logical. Now, if two people show up and they're both qualified for the job, one's Dominican, one's Peruvian, and the third's a black guy or an Asian guy, I relate to, these guys are the same. This dude likes the food I like. This dude, he talks the way I do. I don't have to feel a little bit weird. Then, like Puerto Ricans, Dominicans have some organic beef. It's not organic at all. And, whoever your neighbors are in Peru, you've got your beefs, and, it's people in the next city or this next country. Everybody hates their neighbor for some goddamn tribal reason that we all do.
Yeah.
But people tend to hire their own in very, very obvious ways. And so there is this sort of thinking, there's this dialogue that everything's equal. And it really isn't, because people are just oh man, this is a sneaker dude. I'm hiring a sneaker dude. Well, I'm going to hire that guy. Well, he's a little bit more qualified. Yeah, but this dude, he's more qualified across the board for what the culture of our business here. The culture of our business exists in this way.
Yeah.
You're talking out from the bottom of your teeth. It exists in such a way. And that becomes part of the subconscious and very conscious bias. And, people face that. And how long did it take for us to finally see a black quarterback?
Yeah.
In the NFL? It was, everybody could be black, but the general of the team, and clearly there had to be something deliberate there. Mm-hmm. And maybe it was down on the college level. Maybe it was down on the high school level. It was just like the brains of the operation, sir. There's a bias there. Yeah. And we may not even be conscious that we're being biased. We're following, we're adhering. There's an adherence to the rule.
Yeah. The
cultural rules that may be our own bias, or may just be like, well, that's the way it is.
Yeah.
I love that when people say that's the way it is.
No, I think we fall back a lot on familiarity and conformity.
Yeah.
And I feel like, just in the grand scope of things, even in this space, I think when we talk about these brands, they like to lean on their most classic models, and you don't want to see them stray away from that, because the moment they do and it fails, nobody cares and nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it does. I won't get too much into it. I'll say it. I'll keep this brief because it's really not very interesting. I think part of the reason that we keep going back to these original models is that in Nike's credo, their mission statement initially, they've deviated it from it since. But at one point they said, we are not a lifestyle brand. And they would staunchly, no, we're not a lifestyle brand. Recently, they have accepted that, if they weren't a lifestyle brand, they wouldn't reissue retro stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because in terms of technology, it is obsolete and in some cases dangerous. I mean, some of these things will roll your ankle on the court or on the field. Yeah. They're negligent. You should be able to sue them for it. You're giving me sports equipment and I just, ruined my career. I'm suing your ass.
Yeah.
So there's a hypocrisy there. But the reason that I think we go back to these things is that as it's gotten more tech, materials got thinner. There's less need for this. Everything's looking like a boxing shoe now. It's all this thin ass sole with this tight to the ankle, up the mid ankle. It just, where's the sex appeal? Where's the style? Where's the flash and the flair? The interest in the design. And you see dudes are coming from the hood and they're making it to the NBA and they're like, yeah, I want to wear those Air Force Ones on the court. Yeah. And they're like, but we're trying to push your brand. Yeah. We need you to sell new stuff in Foot Locker. We need you. Like, yeah, but that's okay. So how do we do this then? How do we? And I think, I would suspect that there's a lot of people that run into that. When we were releasing the Espo Air Force 2, Pharrell had already checked out of Nike. He phoned that one. It was all black with the NERD brain on it. Mm-hmm. And he was already out the door looking towards
next
opportunity.
Towards Adidas at that point, which, that takes a couple of years to develop and whatnot. It's even, then things aren't, they're faster now. But there is, there's a certain need of like, give the people who influence culture, sports, all kinds of things, the leeway. Give Kai, give anybody the leeway to create within your platform. Let the artists be artists and you fucking guys be businessmen.
Yeah.
And find some sort of common ground where you can move the abacus back and forth and the bean counters can make their shit and the shareholders can get fucking paid. They don't deserve to be paid. They don't deserve any money at all, but the shareholders get what they're going to get because they bought in. They're not supporting a company with their shares at this point. What the fuck do they get paid for?
Nah, yeah.
And then allow the traditional lines of recruiting talent and thus generating sales go, and the unconventional.
Yeah.
Allow some people to skip college. And come right into the league and give them the education they need. They went and made an offer to Kai. He may not take it. But there probably was a point where he probably would have. Because they could have said, look, here's this. You're going to get this annually, these millions annually. You're going to get this on extension. You get first right of refusal. You look at the same way it's like an athlete. They negotiate. Mm-hmm. But with him, because they, no one's going to give him that chance, they can take advantage of that, but in a fair way, in an ethical way.
Yeah.
And then go, we like what you're doing. And I know the argument is it encourages people to further steal to get in here. You're still Nike, man. Nobody's going to create another Nike.
Yeah.
In anytime soon.
No, yeah.
And as we've seen that with all of Adidas energy, they can't get there. Nike is its own phenomenon. It's Microsoft is bigger. Apple is more special.
Yeah.
Fuck the tech end of it and whether you're a PC guy or an Apple guy, or it's irrelevant. Apple is sexy as fuck.
Yeah. It's like you could have the same argument about like the nuance of like EV vehicles where like, everyone's like, Tesla's the thing, but hey, BMW has an EV vehicle and you can get a Hummer EV and like, but do you really want that or you want a Tesla? Like,
and that's tough because you're just like, Elon is a maniac. Like I wouldn't, if I had a Tesla, I would have sold it.
Yeah.
Just because I can't subscribe to that. I'm just, without saying it, I'm pretty obvious.
Yeah.
I don't subscribe to what that dude's talking about.
Yeah.
I don't have any empathy for any billionaire. I never will. I don't care about money. I am a capitalist, but I'm a capitalist that believes that there needs to be an ethical guideline, and that's subjective.
Yeah.
So you can't really do it, right? But you shouldn't be able to just make unfettered amounts of cash for no reason, not without paying a hefty tax, much bigger tax than, the most prosperous time in America was like the rich were being taxed like 80% or something.
Yeah.
Everybody forgets that. Make America great again. Oh yeah. You want to get taxed 80%? That's the kind of great it's going to take. Fucking idiots.
Nah, yeah. But
anyways,
Ari, we've talked about, where you've been, where you've come, what you've,
Where am I going?
That's the question. So what are you doing currently? If anyone wants to reach out for you for work, or what are you doing these days?
Man, shit, if I know. I'm always busy. But I find myself in a very interesting place, an exciting place for me that I haven't felt in a while. It's an unfamiliar place. It's a little bit scary. And I'm speaking from a creative and professional standpoint. My marketing company's still going, somehow surviving. It's just, word of mouth, and it's pushing forward, and we're having a pretty good year. It's relative. I don't think I'm like out here buying fucking Lamborghinis. It's not happening. But I'm doing stuff that I can feel for the most part good about. I'm doing some design projects that I appreciate. I just wrote the foreword, which in this case it's a photo book.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wrote the foreword, and foreword is, it's usually like a page, maybe 3 if it's crazy. This is like 10 solid pages. It's all the text that is in this book for a guy, Neil Santos, who's a good friend of mine. He's from Inwood, OG downtown Dominican, who, if you know downtown, if you know the Supreme story, Supreme, Lafayette, and even now on Bowery, that space in between where it's Little Italy.
Mm-hmm.
And people call it Soho because I think that just does better on paper, but that's traditionally Little Italy. Has a huge Dominican community, and it has, over time gotten smaller and smaller, but there's still a lot of Dominicans there. Comparatively, it's not like the Heights or something. It's a very diverse area. But in this neighborhood is this really interesting story. And I've been downtown for many, many years. I've lived in that neighborhood for 22. But there's a very interesting story and an interesting dynamic between the Dominicans and the Italians, and particularly that one block that's a block away from Supreme is where John Gotti had the infamous Raven Night Club, social club, where he was eventually arrested because of recordings from the apartment above the Raven Night Social Club. There's a very interesting dynamic of Dominicans and Italians there who were in that era, and are still there, and they're in some of a lot of rent controls, and people have bought and owned buildings, and they're there, along with the Chinese, and most of the Italians are gone at this point, but other types of people. But this book, which I think you guys could appreciate, is talking about the last bodega in that footprint. It's a very kind of small footprint, but it's had a huge impact on movies and culture, and from fashion to mob movies, and based on actual mob. John Gotti, who took over the Gambino crime family, right? And it's this very small thing where there's like Supreme over here, and there's like, a few years before there's the Gottis, and it's this interesting story, and it's a community that's had bodegas, and they've one by one, gone like they've all gone. They're all being sold, and like the Yemen community has come in and really championed a new style of bodega, a new deli. And a lot of Dominicans and Puerto Ricans have been able to retire back to their places of birth, happy. But there's something in the fabric of that that's being lost in that neighborhood as everything's changing. Supreme's a $2 billion brand, and it was just a skate shop. There's a lot of things changing. So this book, unintentionally, and it was just a bunch of pictures of my friend Neil Santos, who has this brand called Teamworks. And he's been around for a long time, but he's sort of now coming into his own at the right age, the right time. And he found a bunch of pictures on old phones, like flip phones and like Sidekick type shit or something, and things he had on some drives going through boxes. And he had enough pictures of just dudes and them hanging out in this bodega, fucking around with like the Yemen dudes who took it over from the Dominicans. And there's this interesting little story being told there. And the photos really show the characters and the character of what it became. And what I did is I came in and wrote this piece and all my craziness and flowery words and metaphors and whatever. It's probably all kinds of wrong in many ways. I'm not, proclaimed to be a writer, but I do a lot of writing. And I wrote this foreword that talks about that. And it's in this book. The book is being sold at Supreme. I think all the locations worldwide, or at least in the US, I think. I think Teamworks, if you go to Neil, if you look it up, I'm sure you can, Neil Santos and Teamworks, you can look that up. And it's a picture book that shows things that many people can relate to. But the story tells a quintessential New York story. And it also talks about what all of us in the inner city have gone through, as we've seen gentrification, regentrification almost, and prices and things go crazy, that the things that were so charming and interesting get lost. And that's just part of change. Those things were there because things had changed to get to that point, right? So, and so that's just what I've been working on. I wrote on that, and we had to rewrite it, and that took some time. And it's a very interesting story. And Neil's doing some very interesting things. And again, if you love Supreme, it ties into Supreme. It ties into, if you like mob movies, who doesn't like Supreme and Scarface? In Carlito's Way and, Goodfellas and all of that. Yeah. It's I'm not at length talking about that, but there's a connection between all these things that people don't really realize. And they really aren't connected by any other way than proximity.
Yeah.
Right. And it talks about this bodega on this block, in this neighborhood, in this city, on this earth. And we go, as Neil said, we're out here looking at the macro and we zoom in on the micro. So I did that. And long before that, for several years now, I've been working on the sort of a book that talks about my work and stuff. And particularly it talks about this project and really sort of setting some things clear and straight as the sneaker has taken on its own life and made its own sort of weird economy in a way, of people who just seem to keep doing variations of the theme, and from menthol to Marlboro to whatever. It goes in and talks, or at least the way I'm positioning it, the way I'm writing it, is that it talks about that. And as people have done this, they've gone into the parody and they've gone into what they feel is some sort of sex appeal with it, but they've completely lost the social message. Fuck this.
Yeah.
And if I wanted to make money, I would have bootlegged them my fucking self. They're already a bootleg. And everyone who goes on to try and make money from it that way is only proving the case study correct.
Yeah.
Is only proving that people do anything for the money.
No, that's facts.
And the clout. Clout is worth more than money these days. People's egos are fucking.
That's today's social currency.
Yeah. So there's that in the works, and then the usual projects that I'm doing. I'm always doing logo work and design work and mentoring people and working with people in the background. Helping people. From 18 to 80, it just doesn't matter. I'm compelled to help. It's the way I am, and I'm compelled by. I'm not the most moral person in the world. I've stolen and done stuff. I've come from the street, but I do feel that we all need to be a bit more compassionate and human. And I think that corporations shouldn't have a license because of this society, this democratic capitalist society that we have, that we all enjoy. I certainly do. It shouldn't be a license to screw people who don't know better.
No.
So that's my mission. That's my continued mission long before this. It's going to be to the day I die. And I'm a hypocrite like everybody, and everybody's a hypocrite. They're all living in hypocrisy. And I just try to be honest about mine. I'm trying to make projects that make corporations and people honest about theirs.
Gotcha.
That's what I'm doing.
Very noble.
Thanks, man.
Very, very noble.
It's genuine. I promise. Yeah. It's very genuine.
We could all appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.
No, for sure. My last question to you would be,
it wasn't me.
If Nike or anyone were to approach you, given your background and your tenacity and your respected know-how, would you design an official collaboration with? You don't have to fill in the blank, but with any brand, footwear wise, in this day and age.
Well, I mean, it's before I was, diving into the truth of what Nike does. I was a fan, and I still am. I mean, look, like I said, I know how to love somebody and not like them. Love them for their connection to my life, and vice versa. Like I like Nike. I don't love them, motherfuckers. And so I think Nike would, their ego, come on, man. There's people doing far less than me, and they're just like, you're out of the kingdom forever. And so when I was doing this, I knew it was like, oh, this is it. I'm I'm going to be out forever. And that was the best decision I made. So, you know, yeah, sure. But I don't feel, I'm not young enough to be desperate for that clout. And the clout that I get from the right people, for standing my ground, for having morality, for being able to illustrate my intelligence, is far more valuable to me than an army of, 16 to 24-year-olds, who love that colorway. And, let's not get it twisted. Everyone who ever touched a model for Nike since the original designer made it has not designed a shoe ever. Painting by numbers, this is a coloring book, you take a white on white and say where the colors are going to go and add some materials, is not designing.
Yeah.
From it is, but not really. No more than me.
Right.
I actually had to go out there and do something. I mean, this is the Soul.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen it, the Soul it's a parody. It's a takeoff. But Nike has the the pressure points there. It's like the ball, the foot, and the heel. For me, this is the sweat, right? It's the water droplets.
Yeah, you had the dollar signs too.
Yeah, the dollar signs, because they have stars on there, and stars, like what the fuck kind of ego?
Or if you're Drake, you put hearts on there.
Hearts on there, yeah. And and an interesting thing is, like, now the tags that these brands have, they say things, they'll do all kinds of things in there, but it used to just be the corporate mission statement. And that's what this was about. When I did this, that was still sort of the process. I mean, I don't think I would work with Adidas. And they wouldn't work with me either. Like, I've never been offered anything from anybody. And I take it as a compliment. A friend of mine has a pair 3 or 4, and he has an unfolded box in a floating frame, cost him like $1,500 to frame up or something. And he has he's one of my best friends, and he has a printout of the Soul from the CAD drawing the year before it even went into production, but the factory produced CAD drawing before it actually was being sampled up yet. And he got that into Sotheby's. And I was like, you what? I was like, well, and they were like, well, this is a one-of-one situation. I mean, it's the box unfolded. It's never been folded. It's not unfolded. It never had been folded. It's like, your friends, you give them your stuff. I had to order 1,500 boxes, from Illinois. They weren't in China. It just wasn't made in China. These came in white boxes, shipped from China. And I did it at my house, folded it all up with the twins and my girlfriend at the time from the Heights. And so, he had this box and he has this printout, and he framed these things. And so went into Sotheby's. Sotheby's had it slated for auction, had a date set up, an expectation of 24,000 and up. And the Virgils rolled in. And then suddenly he got a notice, a letter that said,
you've been bumped.
It said, the legal team has now deemed these I think problematic or something like that, some like real ambiguous type of word. And it, when he told me that, first I was like a little bit heartbroken. I was like, oh, I really wanted to see, like,
what it would go.
Yeah, what it would go for. I knew it would go for whatever the current market value is, whatever that means. I mean, I know what it means, but to the Menthols. But then, how far could it go? It's a one-of-one. It'd be an interesting. But then it hit me like pretty, within minutes. I was like, no, this is way better.
Yeah.
It's been rejected by Sotheby's, who put it in and saw its value, but are so threatened by their relationship with Nike and that they generated whatever $100 million from those Virgils,
Louis Vuitton,
which
Louis Vuitton.
The market goes up and down, whatever. Who is this auction house that sells art, right? Essentially, whether it's real estate art or jewelry or fine art, oil paintings, they sell art. but it was about the dollar, wasn't it? They didn't stand up for art.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't stand up for me.
Yeah.
And fuck, if you hate me, you think I'm some idiot. Like no one's probably even looked into that to any degree. They just probably saw that there was a value, and there was some, and they had. I connected with a few people. I don't, want to say who, but once I talked to them, I was like, oh, what happened? And they're like, we don't know.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think we all know, is that they're afraid to piss Nike off.
Yeah.
That's some bully shit.
Yeah.
Nike can't go. You can't. What should they not sell Adidas too? Because who's the number one rival of Nike? It's got to be Adidas.
Yeah.
Don't sell Adidas? Come on, man. I'm no threat to anybody. Never have been. The fuck? And so I find that, it's that to me, like when you talk about me collaborating with another, with a Nike or with Adidas or Puma or whoever, I just don't see it as a possibility. And if it was, could it ever be better?
Yeah.
Then I'm the Joker out here. I mean, I look like the fucking Joker. This conversation perpetuates. It keeps going. And it can keep going. And other people can pick up the blueprint. No, not making a cigarette shoe. But pick up here and understand that making a social statement, making it smart, adding some sophistication to something that almost has no sophistication can have more value than you could possibly imagine.
Oh,
and
sure.
When I created as a case study and social statement, and I thought to myself, it doesn't matter. All this money went straight down a hole. The box alone was $27.50 per box, not including the die cut, not including the die cut up front. So this was a straight L, even if I never got sued or anything. But isn't it a blank check? Stop having the flip mentality. I'm going to buy this and I'm going to flip it and double it and flip it and triple it and flip. How about you do something of substance? And it's so culturally significant that you can just keep writing your own checks afterwards.
Yeah.
Take the L to make the W. Did I really take an L?
I don't think so.
I wouldn't say so.
No.
You think that wasn't part of the design? What could Nike ever give me that wouldn't be better than this, for me, this social dialogue?
No.
If I was in their pocket, I could never speak this way. I could never be honest. I could never be truthful. I could never criticize.
Yeah, that message doesn't go out.
It's not happening. It's not happening. So for me, you can't put a dollar value to that. And because of what I did, I was able to gain opportunities that I wouldn't have gained otherwise, because now I'm talking a dialogue that most people aren't trying to talk. It's more than just one of one in terms of a shoe.
Yeah. It's
a one-on-one in terms of an opportunity.
I love that.
That was real deep. I really cut deep.
Well, that's what I'm here for, and a little bit of comedy. And
we've been speaking about like all these undertoning conversations that people should be having, but at the very least, we love having new conversations. Brought to you by Blue Royal. It's a tequila rum aspect where instead of like thinking like, oh hey, this bartender's just great at what they do. Blue Royal brings that mix already onto the table where they're, they come in one great bottle, and, you can mix it with your holiday drinks. You can mix it with, your standard, elixirs and stuff like that. But, what they do for us is they allow us to have conversations with the likes of you. So
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Anybody who's sponsoring, the right questions and the good energy.
Yeah.
They're doing the right thing.
Yeah. And we also appreciate that you, unbeknownst to yourself, dressed in the dapperest of the blues.
I did not know.
Yeah.
First of all,
every shade of
no
blue.
one told me that this was even sponsored. So,
yeah.
But I guess a style recognized style.
There it is.
There we go. Very, very on brand,
Hey. Thanks for sponsoring, guys.
On that note, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Give us your insight on what we presented to you today. If you have any comments or questions for Ari or for the topic of discussion, by all means, put it in the comments. Ari will see these. He might not be the one relaying the message, but we'll articulate his thought process through our, social media platforms. And at the very least, if you for some reason have questions on like designing and stuff, his IGs are always open.
Any question? I've been inactive on Instagram for about 6 months now. I took a sabbatical intentionally. I'm very, very active, especially when talking to people on a personal level, DMs and stuff. I'm starting to weed through the thousands of DMs that I have literally now, and then it's like tons of spam from India and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do engage and I do talk to people. And if you're sincere, if you're trying to troll me, I get it. I don't really engage in that. I'm not. It's people troll. It's some people, that's all they have in life, and I understand that. Yeah. But I'm a grown man, and I'm here for a different sort of dialogue. If you have something substantive to say and talk about, if you need to talk about something, or if you have an opinion, and the opinion is not the usual regurgitated stuff, about like, get your own. We get it.
Yeah.
If you have some original thoughts, subscribe, like, and comment, and let's get to the substance.
Word.
There we are.
Peace.